your call to ministry. You were telling us before we started recording that, well, actually, you didn't mean to tell us, but Blake, rudely was trying to harp on you and, destroy your confidence before you came on and were recorded.
Everybody knows this is a lie.
It's just a tactic on how we make our guests humble and ready for this process. And he was saying that one of your first sermons that he got to go listen to. He got to go listen to. Notice how I talk. I'm a nice guy, and he's rude. It was an hour and 11 minutes long. Tell us about that.
It's funny to me that he has it like the length of it memorized after all these years. Right. I mean, back to the stopwatch.
11 minutes and 37 seconds.
Yeah. He took a selfie with it.
Give or take.
He took a selfie with it, and those things didn't even exist back then. Yes. So that long one was I think my third sermon, but the first two were significantly shorter. I can say that since then I have not preached a shorter sermon than those first ones, but I have preached longer than that long one. So I feel like, I finally got it figured out.
Yeah. Now, you said that when you were first starting out, and we're not mentioning names or anything like that, but it was just you didn't feel that you had really a lot of guidance as far as how to lay this thing out. Do you think that was a personal experience for you that's unique to you, or is that you think it's typical in the church today?
Well, I think it's typical for a lot of guys struggling with the call to ministry. I think if you were to spend 10 seconds in a seminary class and talk to guys who are going into ministry, especially if you have experience yourself, you realize these guys are clueless, and I was certainly one of them. My first sermon was on friends because I found the topic in the back of my Bible, and I thought that would be fascinating to preach on. I didn't pray about it. I just thought, well, that sounds neat. That sounds hip. And so that's what I preached on. And I used every verse that topic. And that was it. And I knew nothing about the art of preaching and public speaking. No one ever really took me to the side and talked to me, even from the mechanics of hand gestures to voice inflection to eye contact to movement. No one ever talked to me about that. And those are just mechanics, but just exegesis was a term I'd never heard of until I got to seminary. And I didn't grow up with exegetical preaching, even textual preaching, and I think there's good in topical preaching. But I just never been exposed to start with verse 1 and don't stop until you're done with the passage. I didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
And so when I did go into vocational ministry, a lot of it was figuring out the hard way. And I was blessed. I grew up in the church that loved me and gave me room to fail. And that was nice. But then I became a youth pastor at a church who they knew I wasn't probably going to stick around to be a youth minister forever. And they let me love the students and serve the church. And I had an elderly pastor who would let me fail, and he would take all the darts for me, and he would guide me through a lot of things. And he wasn't an exegetical preacher, but he loved his people. So I did my first communion, my first deacons meeting, my first baptism was a sixth grader named Kyle. I did all of that. And really ever since that experience, one of the things that we do at East Frankfort, we've had two interns so far. We try to pour ourselves into a pastoral intern per year. It's free labor for us, but it's great experience for them. Because a lot of guys need to know that they need to know how to preach, and they need to know what to look for in a sermon. But more than that, they need to know how to love the people they're preaching to. That's a Martin Lloyd-Jones quote. Preaching is one thing, but loving the people you preach is the most important thing. And so I love taking them on visits, funerals, weddings, counseling, all of that stuff. Is not that I know how to do all that stuff, but that we can do it together and we can learn from each other. I didn't really have a whole lot of that. And I had some, I remember my first funeral, a guy pulled me aside and he said, by the way, the preacher stands at the head of the casket. I didn't know that. And it was actually well, the pastor you guys would know, and that saved me for my first funeral. No one ever told me that, and so I think a lot of young guys now, ideally the local church would do that, and I had mentors growing up, so I'm not picking on my home church because I had some, and I was able to preach at a lot of other churches, but those are invaluable experiences that you can get. Let me tell you one story, then move on. But my first funeral as a pastor, I did about 10 funerals, either attended or did about 10 funerals in the first 3 months as a pastor. And with a newborn son, had just moved the area. It's a real eye-opening experience. That first sermon, the family, I had met them one time, brand new, still had the new preacher smell and everything. So our chairman of the deacons preached, and he was really nervous about it. And so I remember we led the procession. I'd never done that before. I didn't know how fast you're supposed to drive in those things. I just didn't know. And so my deacon said, "I'm going to follow your lead because you know what you're doing." And I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I'd only
You didn't tell him any different.
No. So I made it up. But it was a real blessing because in that rural community, he knew everybody. So I followed his coattails and acted like I was the expert. And so we really leaned on each other, and it was a great funeral. He did a great job speaking, and I think I did the burial, and it worked out. But I remember that comment, that I didn't know what I was doing. And our goal when we do the internship is guys don't have to have that same experience that I did.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because there's 1,000 things that nobody who's not pastoring thinks of.
Yeah.
No one ever thinks of the things that really matter. I mean, a lot of those really matter. I mean, if you didn't stand at the head of the casket, it's not the end of the world. But that's something you really want to know. And there's no seminary class for that. There's no way you're going to know that unless somebody that cares about you within the local church who's done it tells you that. And there's 1,000 of those things that you can't learn in seminary.
And honestly, there's so many good Christian books out there, but practically being a pastor at a local church, there's just not that many resources out there.
Yeah. I've read all the books, but nothing can replace having someone you look up to and respect, shoulder to shoulder, carrying a lot of your burdens for you and just walking you through stuff. There's a good friend of mine who just got into ministry. It wasn't part of the plan, just God had kind of led him into it. And he was a hardworking person and one of my good friends. And I remember he made a comment, and I immediately picked up what he's experiencing is a common experience of ministers that we may call just depression. It's unique for a lot of ministers, but the way it works, and he couldn't articulate it. He wasn't saying he was sad or depressed. I said, I know what you're going through. You're going through the same thing every pastor goes through. Well, books talk about that, but their experience isn't necessarily your experience. But just to have someone you can talk to, it just is so much easier. I'll never forget the first time I felt that, and the second time I felt that, and I thought there was something wrong with me, and then I wanted to blame the church or the people that I thought caused it and all that, without realizing this is just the burden of ministry. And I need to learn how to handle it in a healthy way.
I'll be honest with you. Yes, that is a true statement as far as pastor depression, or whatever you want to label it. But I have been blessed by two people sitting right here that have always been willing when I've given both of you guys a call and just listen, talk something out. Sometimes it's like not even, I got nothing for you, but you were there to listen. And I have more people than just you guys in my life that have been able to do that, but specifically you two. And that is so helpful for pastors to just have, even if it's just one person that they can call up anytime, say, this is going on, just listen to me, help me with this. It's invaluable.
People don't realize that pastors cannot be as vulnerable as they would like in front of their people. It's difficult to be both a pastor and a member of the local church. and for practical reasons, for leadership reasons, shepherding reasons. So you really need someone that can let you just vent, or just share your broken heart, but then direct you back to the people you're called to love. And I've always felt, and this may be my relationship with my wife, but I felt that my wife is not my punching bag, and she's not the one that has to carry my burdens. And so I've always tried to not burden her with all of that, right? But it's my wife. Different wives are different, and so allowing her to love me the way she does is very freeing. But the need to share with someone who knows kind of what I'm going through, is very, very helpful, because then that allows me to really love my wife and allow her to love me the way that she is capable, is very good at doing it. This discipler and mentor, you're going to suffer, and a lot of guys don't last long in ministry because of stuff like this. I mean, if I think of the dorms when I lived in them, I think there's 2 of us out of about 15 of us that I know for sure that are still in ministry, and I'm not that old. I'm not young, but I'm not that old.
Yeah.
And it's really tragic.
Yeah.
And this is really what discipleship is. It's not primarily, even maybe is a way to, the word to use, primarily someone teaching the other person the Bible, but it can often be a person living a life alongside another person, and based on almost I want to say proxy, osmosis. There's a sense in which a life on a life can produce discipleship in ways that you can't imagine. And so people know that they're supposed to be discipling people, but they often say, I don't know the Bible well enough, or I don't feel like I've been trained well enough, et cetera, et cetera. But if you know that you need to stand at the head of the casket,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, that's a
Yeah.
small detail, but that was a discipleship moment, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the sense of relief I had, for something like that. I give you another little simple example. I did a co-op my senior year in high school in Owington, and I followed a pastor around. He was a pastor in Monterey, and I knew him growing up. Grew up with his twin kids. They were 2 grades behind me, and it was the first time I went to go visit someone in the hospital, and within the week they had died. Right. That was a real shock to me. It's not that I hadn't been around death, but just to meet someone and then to see him passed away, which just rattled me. And I remember he pulled me aside before we went to go see him. He said that normally what he would do whenever someone is in that process of passing away, he'll go to KFC, buy a bucket of chicken, and bring it to the hospital. He said, because that family there, they haven't had real food. They're not even eating cafeteria food. They're eating out of the vending machine, if that. And so if you could do just a simple ministry of a bucket of chicken, I know it sounds goofy, but that never would have crossed my mind, that ministry is more than just praying at the bedside of someone who's dying, is that you invest in people where they are, and small gestures go a long way. Now, I've not done a lot of buckets of fried chicken. But my mind and ministry will go in other directions as well. But it's the same sort of principle. Just someone to help you with something that simple goes a long way.
Yeah, and I want to amend what I was saying. I think discipleship is primarily the delivery of the Word of God, but it has more elements than just a didactic teaching of the Word of God. That bucket of chicken is not in the Bible, but hospitality is.
Yeah.
And hospitality is part of discipleship, and living out the Word of God is part of discipleship. It's how a life on a life matters. So I just want to make sure I corrected that, so that I didn't go down in the annals of history podcast saying that, well, the Bible don't matter that much in discipleship. That's not my position. That's not what I meant.
Yeah. But think about how healthy our churches would be if seasoned couples, however you may define that, 20 years. My wife and I are coming up 14 in a few weeks. So I mean, we're not that old. So by the time we're 40, I mean, we'll be right at near the 20 mark. What if seasoned married couples invested in newly married couples in the church, and just built relationships with them? What if you got a family with teenagers, and that whole family invested in the family with toddlers in it, and just pour their lives into them. What if widows invested in singles? And it takes spiritual maturity on both ends. The young have to respect the elderly, but the elderly have to invest in the young. I mean, it's a Titus 2 or 3 makes it very clear that this is what we should be doing. The church would be healthier if instead of expecting the preacher to do all the discipling, if the church did all of the discipling.
Yeah.
And that should be happening outside of a Sunday.
That's absolutely true. But of course, that would mean that people would have to be intentional in their lives.
Yeah.
And that is something that lacks in our culture, in our Western Christianity, really profoundly, is people's intentionality with their own lives and their own walks with God, where they feel that they're not just living together by this is all I've got, but they're intentionally married and working on it so that they want to invest in a young, I think it has to go back there. Let's talk